What if they had lost? Well, it's a question that feels almost sacrilegious to ask, a dark thought you're meant to push away. But let's not. Let's imagine it. Imagine waking up one morning in 1946, not to the familiar stars and stripes, but to a flag with a stark, unfamiliar symbol snapping in the wind over the town post office. Imagine soldiers, their uniforms crisp and their language foreign, patrolling the quiet streets of your hometown. This isn't a movie. This is the world that could have been. The shock isn't just in the sight of it, it's in the silence that follows. The heavy quiet of a future that has been stolen and rewritten by someone else. The cause is a cascade of failures, a series of what-ifs that all went the wrong way. Perhaps the Normandy landings were repulsed with catastrophic losses. Perhaps the Soviet Union collapsed under the relentless German advance. Perhaps the United States, facing a two-front war against both Germany and a victorious Japan in the Pacific, was forced into a devastating surrender. The exact mechanics are the stuff of nightmares for historians, but the result is brutally simple. The Axis powers won. Why does this matter? It matters because the world we live in was not inevitable. It was built on sacrifice, on razor-thin victories, and on a shared belief in certain ideals. Immediately after the fall, the world map is redrawn with brutal efficiency. The Axis powers, no longer needing to pretend, carve up the globe according to their ambitions. In Europe, the Greater Germanic Reich stretches from the Atlantic to the Ural Mountains, a vast empire built on slave labor racial purity. In the East, the Japanese co-prosperity sphere is revealed as a colonial empire under Tokyo's absolute control. The United States is partitioned industrial northeast under German military administration. The West Coast is occupied by Japan, a rump. American Republic exists in the central states, a powerless puppet government to keep the population compliant. The first and most immediate change is the law. The U.S. Constitution is suspended as an artifact of a failed system. Freedom of speech abolished. Freedom of assembly abolished. Freedom of the press abolished. New identity cards issued categorizing citizens by ethnicity and political reliability, Jewish citizens rounded up. Other undesirables rounded up. Properties seized. Massive propaganda campaigns begin, presenting occupation as re-education to restore order. For the average family, life shrinks to the four walls of their home and the length of the ration line. Food, once abundant, becomes a tool of control. Ration cards are distributed, allotments are meager, barely enough to sustain a family. Produce requisitioned, meat requisitioned, grain requisitioned. Black markets spring up in alleyways and basements, a loaf of bread can cost a wedding ring, speech becomes a minefield. A careless word or a joke can mean a night visit from the secret police Gestapo in New York. Kenpei Tai in San Francisco. Children are urged to report on their parents at school. Gathering more than 3 people requires a permit. People adopt a public face and a private face, praising the regime in public, hiding true thoughts in private. The country is split into zones. Crossing requires hard-to-get passes. Work becomes servitude. Factories retooled for Axis war machines and colonial projects. Engineers, chemists, physicists are forced onto military projects under guard. Refusal can mean imprisonment or forced labor camps. Culture is not just suppressed, it is actively dismantled and rebuilt. Squads of soldiers search libraries and bookstores with long lists of banned authors. Books by Mark Twain, Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald are pulled from the shelves and thrown into massive bonfires that light up the night sky. In their place come approved texts, German philosophy, Japanese poetry, volumes praising the new leaders. Owning a banned book becomes a serious crime, forcing people to hide books under floorboards and in secret compartments, turning private libraries into acts of rebellion. Hollywood is co-opted entirely. Studios are under propaganda ministry control. Gone. Tales of American heroism, gone. Romantic comedies. New films glorify the Axis victory, demonize former Allied leaders, promote racial hierarchies. Jazz, rooted in African American culture and improvisation, is declared degenerate and banned from radio. Museums stripped of modern art. Galleries filled with state-approved art. Realistic leader portraits, idealized homelands, heroic sculptures of soldiers and workers. Despite the control, a secret culture survives. Banned books passed hand to hand, hidden rooms where people gathered to listen to forbidden jazz on scratchy phonographs. Underground artists create unseen symbolic work. This whispered culture becomes a lifeline and a hope for reclaiming what was lost. Under the new regime, the direction of science and technology takes a sharp, utilitarian turn. The pursuit of knowledge for its own sake is deemed a luxury. All significant research funding is funneled into projects that serve the state's immediate goals: military supremacy, social control, economic exploitation. The brilliant minds that might have been working on polio vaccines or civilian nuclear energy are instead commandeered. Physicists are put to work refining atomic weapons, not for deterrence, but as a tool to crush any nation that dares to defy the new order. The atom bomb becomes a very public symbol of Axis power. The development of television is accelerated, but deployed not as entertainment, but as a one-way conduit for state propaganda, piped directly into every living room. Research into early computing focuses on creating vast databases to track the population, identity records, work assignments, reports from informants. Technological marvels become instruments of surveillance, creating a digital cage. Medical science becomes warped by ideology. Resources pour into military medicine and eugenics-based research aimed at improving the population according to racial theories. Access to the best medical care becomes a privilege reserved for high-ranking officials and citizens deemed racially valuable. For the general populace, healthcare reverts to a basic, underfunded system. With conquered America's resources, German engineers perfect long-range rockets. Japanese biological weapons research expands and industrializes. The world lives under constant threat of weapons that are not just more powerful, but more insidious. An arms race to create tools ensuring permanent, unchallengeable dominion. In the aftermath of the Axis victory, the global political landscape becomes a tense and unstable duopoly. The world is divided between the Greater Germanic Reich and the Empire of Japan, two monolithic powers bound by wartime alliance, but driven by competing imperial ambitions. They maintain a fragile peace, a cold conflict defined by espionage and proxy wars in unconquered territories, South America, Africa, a constant jockeying for resources and influence, no grand debates at a United Nations, only secret negotiations between Berlin and Tokyo, where the fate of millions is decided by two authoritarian regimes. Resistance movements, though brutally suppressed, flicker across occupied territories. In the mountains of Colorado, U.S. Army remnants wage desperate guerrilla war. In France, underground networks print illegal newspapers. In Poland, cells sabotage factory production. These movements are fragmented and isolated, lacking major power support. Yet they are a powerful symbol of defiance. Human desire for freedom survives in the darkest times, a flickering candle in a hurricane. Alliances are redrawn based on pragmatism and fear. Sweden and Switzerland become economic vassals. Argentina and Brazil align openly with the New Order. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, isolated and militarily weak, forced to sign treaties that strip sovereignty for non-invasion guarantees. The global economy becomes a closed loop. Oil from Texas, rubber from Malaya, grain from Ukraine flow into German and Japanese industrial heartlands, enriching the master races while leaving the rest of the world in permanent economic servitude. The Garcia family lived in a small town in California's Central Valley, a place that smelled of soil and oranges. Before the surrender, their life was defined by hard work and small joys. They ran a small cannery, famous for their salsa made from a recipe passed down through generations. They were Americans. After the war ended and Japanese occupation began, their world was turned upside down. The rising sun flag flew over the town hall. Soldiers patrolled the market where they once sold goods. The cannery was seized, repurposed for the Imperial Army. Their son, Miguel, was 17 when the war ended. He was supposed to go to college. Instead, he watched his school's library purged his history teacher arrested for refusing to teach the approved curriculum. A quiet anger began to burn in him. He joined a small group who met in secret listening to forbidden broadcasts from Mexico. Miguel, once a gentle boy who loved books, became a courier, folding and delivering leaflets that told the truth and urged people not to lose hope. The family lived in constant gnawing fear. Every military truck, every knock at the door made their hearts stop. They knew what Miguel was doing. They were terrified and proud. His mother would pack extra food, never asking where he was going. His father would simply place a hand on his shoulder. They helped neighbors when they could, sharing hoarded potatoes, whispered real news. One evening, Miguel returned home, his face pale. A friend had been caught and publicly executed in the town square as an example. The reality of danger had crashed down on him. For a moment, he wanted to give up, retreat into family safety. But then he looked at his younger sister, asleep in her chair, and he knew he couldn't. He wasn't fighting for abstract freedom. He was fighting for her, for a future where she could learn real history, speak her mind without fear, maybe taste their family's salsa recipe again. 10 years on, the initial shock of defeat has hardened into a grim, permanent reality. The occupation is no longer a temporary military situation. It is the new status quo. German and Japanese administration, vast bureaucratic structures manage every aspect of life. Grand, imposing projects in classical and brutalist architecture, monuments designed to display permanence and power. For a child born in 1947, this is the only world they have ever known. The stories of before are just that, stories, as distant and unreal as fairy tales. Society has stratified into a rigid caste system. At the top, German and Japanese colonists, high-ranking officials in guarded compounds with access to the best food, goods, and services. Below them are the collaborators, local citizens who have thrown their lot in with the new regime in exchange for privilege and power. At the bottom is the vast majority of the population, living with rationing, curfews, and constant surveillance. A deep, bitter resentment simmers beneath forced compliance, but organized opposition has become nearly impossible. The surveillance state is too efficient, the punishment too severe. Daily life has settled into predictable, monotonous rhythm. Work, ration lines, and propaganda. People have adapted. They have learned what to say and what not to say. There are still moments of joy, weddings, births, small festivals, but they are muted, private affairs, overshadowed by ever-present authority. Despite the regime's efforts, resistance has not been extinguished. It has evolved. The armed struggle has failed, replaced by resistance of the mind. People secretly teach children erased history, preserve banned music and literature, develop rich vocabulary of sarcasm to mock rulers. This cultural resistance is slow and patient, a long game played over generations, believing that as long as memory of freedom is kept alive, hope of its return can never be truly lost. 50 years after the end of the war, in 1996, the world looks solid, permanent, and unchangeable. The Greater Germanic Reich and Empire of Japan are mature, technologically advanced empires. Their global dominance is absolute. New generations have grown up knowing nothing but the official history. They sing state-mandated songs. They honor leaders whose portraits hang in every public building. The concept of democracy is a historical footnote, taught as a chaotic and failed experiment. The world is orderly and controlled, and for many, it seems normal. Yet, even in this monolithic world, cracks of memory persist. An old woman hums a forbidden spiritual while tending her garden. A middle-aged man finds a hidden box in his grandfather's attic. He opens it to reveal a small, worn American flag. He finds letters from a time of freedom. These are not grand acts of rebellion. They are acts of remembrance, tiny personal connections to a past the state tried to annihilate. These whispers from a lost world are passed down, becoming family secrets potent because they carry the weight of forbidden truth. They are seeds of doubt planted in the sterile soil of the official narrative. The ultimate cost is not just the loss of freedom, it is the loss of a particular kind of human progress. Science and technology are highly advanced, but they are cold and inhuman. Cities are hyper-efficient, but they lack art and spontaneity. The world may have powerful rockets and advanced computers, but it has lost its empathy. The idea that every individual has inherent worth has been replaced by brutal calculus of racial purity and utility to the state. This moral decay, this hollowing out of the human spirit, is the deepest and most tragic legacy of the Axis victory, a loss far greater than any single battle. So we end with a question that lingers. What is more powerful? A state that controls every aspect of life, or a story whispered from one generation to the next? The alternate history of an Axis victory is a stark and horrifying warning. It shows us that history is not a straight line, but a fragile path we choose to walk every day. It reminds us that memory is not passive, it is an act of defiance. And in a world shrouded in darkness, the simple act of remembering the light might be the most revolutionary act of all.